I want you to just imagine for a moment that you're standing in this dimly lit room,
Right.
right? And you're staring into a large antique mirror.
Okay. Setting the scene. I like it.
Right, so you raise your right hand, but the reflection staring back at you, it doesn't raise its left hand the way, a normal mirror would.
It raises its right.
Exactly. It raises its right hand. The reflection is fundamentally entirely broken, like left is right, and time is somehow visibly flowing backward in the glass.
Oh, so raindrops falling up from puddles, that kind of thing.
Yeah, raindrops falling up from the ground behind you. And the very matter making up your reflection isn't even matter anymore. It's been like completely flipped into antimatter.
Which is a terrifying thought.
It really is. It's this completely inverted, distorted alien picture that defies literally everything you know about reality. I mean, if you tried to interact with it, you'd expect the whole thing to just shatter.
Right, because it breaks all the rules.
But now imagine a foundational law of physics that steps in and says, hey, no matter how terrifyingly broken or distorted that reflection looks to you, the original source, the physical breathing you standing in that room, is perfectly, unbrokenly whole.
It's a crazy concept. And, the disorientation of that image, it captures exactly what's at stake here today.
Yeah.
Because we rely so heavily on the physical reflection. We trust the tangible universe that we can actually see and measure and interact with.
We have to, right? I mean, that's what science is.
Exactly. Our entire scientific apparatus is built on observing the reflection in that mirror.
Right.
And deducing the laws that govern it from that reflection. The assumption has, always been that the reflection is reality itself.
Right.
But the massive shift we're unpacking today, it asks us to consider that the physical universe is merely the shadow, just a projection of a much deeper, completely unseeable architecture.
And that brings us to the core of today's deep dive. We are looking at this totally paradigm-shifting paper from 2026. Alongside this set of just incredibly intricate theoretical diagrams compiled by Philip Lilien, the work is titled Beyond Geometric CPT, Unified Coherence Theory of Everything.
It's a dense read for sure.
Oh, absolutely. But going through this stack of sources, I mean, it literally alters the bedrock of how you perceive the space around you, like the time you're experiencing right now and the very matter making up your body.
It does.
So our mission today is to essentially dismantle one of the most established rules of modern physics to see what is actually pulling the strings behind it.
And to really appreciate the magnitude of Lilien's proposal, we have to ground ourselves in the rule he's actually deconstructing.
Right, we have to know what we're breaking before we break it.
Exactly. So we need to look at standard quantum field theory,
Yeah.
specifically the CPT theorem.
CPT.
Right. C stands for charge, P stands for parity, and T stands for time. And together, these three elements form what physicists consider the terminal bedrock of symmetry in the universe.
The ultimate failsafe.
The absolute ultimate failsafe.
So let's make sure we really understand that failsafe, because it sounds super abstract, but it dictates the literal boundaries of existence.
Let's break it down.
Okay, so if I take any physical system, say, I don't know, a single hydrogen atom or even an entire star,
Correct.
and I magically swap all of its particles for antimatter particles, that's charge conjugation, right? The C?
Correct. The C.
Okay, then if I take that system and reflect its special coordinates like a mirror, turning left into right, that's parity, the P.
Yep, you flip the space.
And finally, if I just hit rewind and reverse the thermodynamic flow of time, the T standard physics tells us the fundamental laws of nature governing that system will just continue to function exactly the same.
Right. The system is what we call invariant.
Invariant.
Okay,
Yeah.
because you can break the symmetry of charge on its own, and you can break parity on its own.
Things can be asymmetrical.
Yeah, but if you invert all three simultaneously, charge, parity, and time, the mathematical equations that govern reality balance perfectly, the universe totally allows the operation.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason standard physics is so incredibly confident in this CPT theorem is that it rests on three structurally flawless pillars of modern science: locality, Lorentz invariance, and unitarity.
Okay, I want to pause on those three pillars for a second, because we throw those terms around, but they are heavy concepts.
They are the foundation, yeah.
So locality means that an object is only directly influenced by its immediate surroundings, right?
Right.
Like there is no instant teleportation of force without some kind of mediator. The universe has a strict speed limit for cause and effect.
The speed of light.
Right. And then Lorentz invariance means that the laws of physics are the exact same for all observers, no matter how fast they are moving or what direction they're facing in the space-time grid.
Also true. And then there's unitarity.
Right, unitarity, which
Oh,
is, it's essentially the cosmic ledger of probability.
okay, the ledger. I like that.
Yeah, it basically dictates that the sum of all possible outcomes of any quantum event must always equal 100%. Information is never truly lost in the universe, you know? It just
Oh.
changes form. So because locality, Lorentz invariance, and unitarity are so successfully proven in everything we observe, mathematical proofs basically guarantee that CPT symmetry has to exist to uphold them.
The math is ironclad. We've built this incredibly stable, structurally sound bridge of physics based entirely on this theorem.
But, and this is where it gets wild, Lilien's 2026 paper looks at this mathematically flawless bridge and points out a glaring issue.
A huge issue.
It doesn't actually connect to anything on the other side.
Right. The sources call this the ontological gap.
The ontological gap. So standard quantum field theory proves that CPT invariance must hold.
Yes.
But it is entirely silent on why it holds. Like, it's structurally successful, but ontologically incomplete.
It gives us the what of reality, but fails entirely to explain the source architecture.
Right, like why is this specific threefold composite of charge, parity, and time uniquely privileged in the laws of nature?
Exactly.
Mm.
Standard physics just treats this symmetry as a rigid rule of the environment. It essentially says space-time is the container, and CPT is simply a constraint of that container.
But if we don't know why the container demands that specific constraint, we're kind of just operating in the dark, aren't we?
We absolutely are. We've mapped the behavior of the system without understanding the actual origin of the system itself.
So the best way I could visualize this ontological gap as I was reading through Lillian's diagrams is to think about the game of chess.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. So imagine you are like an alien studying a chess match.
Okay.
Standard physics is the alien who has perfectly mapped out every single rule of the board. You know precisely how the knight moves in that specific L shape. You know the bishop is totally constrained to its starting color.
Right, you've deduced the mechanics.
Exactly. You've defined the mathematical boundaries of the 64 squares perfectly. You can predict outcomes based on those rules. You have this flawless structural description of the environment.
And this is the gap, you have absolutely no idea what wood the board is carved from.
Yes.
You don't know who carved it,
Yep.
or why the creator chose 64 squares instead of, say, 100 squares.
Exactly. Knowing how the knight moves tells you absolutely nothing about the mind of the game's inventor.
Nothing at all.
So standard physics knows the rules of the space-time chessboard perfectly, but it has zero idea why the board demands this specific CPT rule to function.
And that's where Lillien's unified coherence theory comes in. It argues that we need to stop looking at CPT as just a mere constraint of the chessboard.
We need to see it as an ontological signature.
Right. It is the fingerprint of the board's creator, kind of pushing its way through in the rules of the game.
But moving from a constraint to an ontological signature, I mean, that represents a massive strategic shift in how we even approach science, doesn't it?
Huge. If CPT is an ontological signature, it means the symmetry isn't just a byproduct of the space-time container. It suggests that reality's underlying coherence is the primary structure.
And the space-time container itself is secondary. Exactly.
Which is just a terrifyingly huge leap. Because if standard physics is just describing the geometry of the container, the space-time chessboard, and we suddenly realize that space-time isn't the ultimate container at all.
And what is it?
Right. What is it? If everything we see, touch, and measure, including the literal space separating me from you right now, and the time passing as we speak is just a geometric shadow, then we have to ask, what is casting the shadow?
And that leads directly to the foundational premise of Lillien's entire framework. The sources introduce this concept called the Universal Field Tensor.
The UFT.
The UFT, yeah. And we have to be incredibly precise with how we define this because it honestly defies intuition.
It really does.
The universal field tensor is not a quantum field existing inside spacetime. It is the primary absolute coherence-bearing structure that actually precedes all physical manifestation.
Okay, let's break that down, because the human brain really struggles to picture something preceding space and time.
It's hard to wrap your head around. Yeah, because in normal physics, if we talk about an electromagnetic field, we're defining it over a set of coordinates. We say, at this specific GPS location, at this exact millisecond, the magnetic field has a strength of X.
Right. We use space and time as the blank canvas, and we basically paint the field onto it.
But the UFT perspective removes the canvas entirely.
Completely removes it.
It argues that space and time do not exist as a fundamental foundational arena. Instead, the spacetime we actually experience is a reduced, heavily compromised, lower-dimensional projection of the universal field tensor's primitive coherence.
Space-time is the painted picture. The UFT is the gallery itself.
Wow. And the
Right.
sources provide this ontological shift matrix to sort of contrast standard physics with this new UFT perspective.
Yeah, it evaluates reality across 4 distinct dimensions.
Okay, so the first is spacetime itself. As we just noted, standard physics sees it as the deepest arena of reality. But the UFT sees spacetime as a reduced projection.
Right. And the second dimension of that matrix is fields. Standard physics views fields as quantitative values defined over space-time coordinates. Like you said, the paint on the canvas.
And the UFT.
The UFT perspective views what we call fields as reduced expressions of a much deeper, unseeable tensorial architecture.
Tensorial architecture.
Yeah. A tensor in mathematics is an object that describes the relationship between sets of algebraic objects related to a vector space.
Okay, so in English?
In this context, it means reality at its deepest level is purely relational. It is a structure of perfect coherence, not just physical stuff located in a specific place.
Okay, that makes sense. So the third dimension of the matrix is symmetry. And standard physics views symmetries as geometric transformations you perform within the spacetime arena.
Right, like if I take a physical spinning top and rotate it 180 degrees, or look at it in a mirror, I'm performing a geometric transformation inside the container.
But the UFT views symmetry entirely differently. It defines symmetry as an internal mode of coherence restoration.
Exactly. It's not an action happening to an object. It's the underlying source correcting a bias within its own projected shadow.
Correcting a bias. Okay. And the final dimension of the matrix redefines the laws of nature themselves.
Yeah, because we are taught to view the laws of nature as rigid rules governing our environment, like the rules of chess we talked about.
Right.
But from the UFT perspective, the laws of nature are simply the inherent symmetries of the invariant source structure leaking into our observable reality. The rules aren't arbitrary constraints. They are the unavoidable reflection of the UFT's absolute perfection.
See, I am really struggling to conceptualize the mechanics of this, and I imagine you listening are too. Because of everything, the chair I'm sitting in, the light hitting my eyes, the gravity pulling me down, is just a projection from this perfect mathematical relational tensor light.
How does that translation actually happen?
Yes. How does the unseeable perfection of the UFT degrade into the messy, chaotic, highly biased physical universe that we exist in? Because our universe is definitely not perfect. It's full of friction and asymmetry.
And to understand that translation, we have to look at the mechanism of manifestation itself.
Manifestation.
Right. The sources posit that manifestation inherently requires reduction. You simply cannot take the infinite, unconstrained, perfectly coherent architecture of the universal field tensor and fit it completely into a stable, physical, localized reality.
The universe essentially has to squeeze itself down.
Exactly. To exist in a tangible form, the source must leave certain aspects of its perfection undisclosed. It actually has to adopt biases to stabilize into physical phenomena.
You know, it makes me think of trying to take a beautifully complex, highly detailed, three-dimensional physical object, like, say, a complex knot of rope,
Okay, a 3D knot.
and trying to perfectly represent it by casting its shadow onto a flat, two-dimensional piece of paper.
It's a perfect visual.
Right. The 3D knot is perfect in its own space, but the moment you force it to exist as a 2D shadow, you violently strip away an entire dimension of information. Lines that don't intersect in reality will overlap in the shadow. Proportions will distort. You create massive, observable biases simply through the act of projecting it downward into a lower dimension.
That is a highly functional way to visualize it. The physical universe is the 2D paper. The UFT is the 3D knot.
Okay.
And the moment the source introduces those dimensional biases to create physical reality, it creates a structural imbalance. If it doesn't have a mechanism to correct or account for those biases, the underlying coherence of the source would just tear apart.
So it needs an internal corrective system.
Exactly. And that brings us to Lilien's radical reinterpretation of C, P, and T.
The triad of inversion.
Right.
The paper argues that charge, parity, and time are not external transformations we impose on physical objects. They are the specific internal mechanisms the source uses to nullify the biases introduced during that downward projection process.
They are the corrections.
So let's dig into the mechanics of this triad, starting with C charge conjugation. The standard textbook view is that C just swaps a particle for its antiparticle, right?
Right. You change an electron into a positron.
Okay.
A minus sign flips to a plus sign.
But the UFT redefines C as coherence polarity inversion.
Right. In the UST framework, electrical charge is not just a tiny sticker slapped onto the side of a physical particle. Charge is the projected, visible sign of a much deeper structural orientation within the tensor.
We can think of it as a polarity bias.
Exactly. When the UFT projects downward to manifest a physical particle, it actually has to favor one polarity over the conjugate polarity just to remain stable in our spacetime.
So when you apply a C inversion, when you swap matter for antimatter, you aren't just changing a physical property.
No, you are forcing the system to view the exact same deeper coherence relation through its opposite hidden conjugate polarity. You are mechanically nullifying the polarity bias that was required to manifest the particle in the first place.
Wow. Okay, so charge conjugation corrects the polarity bias of manifestation.
Yes.
Now let's move to p-parity. Standard physics treats parity as spatial handedness, like flipping left and right.
Mirror image.
Right. But the sources redefine parity as projection orientation inversion. And to explain how space itself has a bias, the diagrams introduce this concept of the hyperfractal dimensional cascade,
Like a cascade.
which fundamentally changes how we think about the three dimensions we literally move around in.
It does. The diagrams detail this fascinating numerical cascade representing the dimensional squeezing process. It begins at 4.0D, which represents the full, unconstrained coherence of the Universal Field Tensor.
4.0D.
Okay, but a true 4.0D structure cannot physically manifest as a localized object. It has to constrain itself.
Right, the 3D not becoming a 2D shadow.
Exactly. So the cascade steps down from 4.0D to an intermediate state of 3.14D.
Okay, hold on. 3.14, like the number pi.
Yes, exactly like pi. And the paper makes a point to clarify that 3.14 isn't a literal measurement of a fractional spatial dimension we can visit.
Okay, good, because that sounds impossible.
Right, it's a pi reference. It mathematically symbolizes the necessary curvature, the twisting, the folding that the higher dimensional architecture must undergo. It has to curl in on itself to squeeze down into the next step, which is our familiar 3.0D spatial reality.
And it even hints at a further reduction to 2.7D at the quantum limit, right?
It does, but the implication of that 3.14D curvature step alone is just staggering.
Why is that?
Because it implies that the three-dimensional space we perceive as absolute up, down, left, right, forward, back is not a neutral, flat arena. Our 3D space is the resulting scar tissue of that hyperfractal folding process.
Scar tissue.
Yeah. When the 4.0D coherence twisted itself to fit into 3.0D, it left orientational biases.
Orientational scars. That means when I hold up my right hand, the concept of right-handedness isn't a fundamental truth of the universe. It is just an artifact of the way the source geometry crumpled when it was projected into physical space.
It's the crease in the origami paper.
The crease in the origami. Wow. So when you apply p-inversion, when you flip parity, you are not just creating a mirror image of a room. No, you are systematically reversing the orientation of how that deeper coherence was folded down the dimensional ladder. You are mathematically ironing out the crease to correct the orientational bias of space itself.
Which brings us to the final, and undoubtedly the most difficult pillar to conceptualize, time reversal.
Yeah, time.
Because standard physics looks at time reversal as literally rewinding a thermodynamic clock.
Just playing the tape backward.
Right. But the UFT redefines it as temporal phase inversion. And to map this out, Lilien introduces a diagram called the multivector time dial.
The time dial.
And this dial does not have one axis, it has five.
Five.
T1 through T5.
See, I have to stop here because reading about 5 time axes basically breaks the brain.
It really does.
I mean, we experience time as relentless, single linear arrow, right? Entropy increases, we get older, not younger. A dropped coffee mug shatters, and the shards never, ever spontaneously reassemble into a mug. We are trapped on a one-way street.
We are.
So what does it mechanically mean to have a multivectorial temporal field with 5 distinct axes?
It means our perception of time is, once again, a highly reduced projection. Imagine that the true nature of time is a complex combination lock.
Okay. A combination lock.
And this lock has 5 distinct gears, corresponding to the T1 through T5 axis. These could represent different quantum phase states, entropic vectors, or informational processing directions within the UFT.
Yeah.
We don't fully know what each gear specifically governs yet, but the structure requires 5.
Right.
But in our observable physical reality, due to the extreme dimensional reduction of manifestation, we are only capable of perceiving the motion of one of those gears.
So if I am staring at a massive combination lock and 4 of the gears are hidden behind a solid metal plate,
Yep.
and I can only see the 5th gear slowly going forward number by number,
Yes.
I am going to assume that the entire concept of the lock is just a single forward-moving wheel.
Exactly. Because that is the only physical evidence you have access to.
Wow.
And because you only see the one gear turning, you perceive the process is completely irreversible. You see the coffee mug shatter and assume the event is linear and permanent.
But it's not.
No. The underlying temporal field is multivectorial. The other 4 gears are still interacting, maintaining the total phase balance of the source. Therefore, T inversion in the UFT is not an attempt to force your one visible gear to magically spin backward.
Because that would break the lock.
That would break the lock.
So what is it doing then?
T inversion is a total phase restoration. It is a mathematical operation that aligns the multivector phase order across all 5 axes simultaneously.
All 5?
Yes. It nullifies the perceived irreversibility of your single, projected timeline by inverting the entire temporal phase field. It recalibrates the combination lock back to its absolute 0 state.
Okay, so we now have the complete triad. C corrects the polarity bias of manifestation. P corrects the spatial orientational scars of the dimensional cascade. And T corrects the multivector temporal phase of the time dial.
You got it.
And when you bring all 3 together, you arrive at the central formal equation of Lilien's paper.
And in that equation, U represents the universal field tensor, the absolute source of total coherence. The term R sub CPT represents the total restoration operator, which is the simultaneous application of charge, parity, and time inversion.
And the text places massive emphasis on the word simultaneous, right? It calls the mechanics simultaneous nullification.
It does. Let's dig into why.
Okay.
Because manifestation inherently requires a reduction of coherence. The 3D not becoming a 2D shadow, and individual inversion is insufficient. If you just apply C, you've only flipped the polarity axis.
You've left the spatial orientational scars and the temporal phase entirely uncorrected.
Right. An isolated inversion leaves the system in a state of severe mathematical tension. You haven't restored the source. You have merely created a differently distorted shadow.
So to completely cancel the biases introduced by manifestation, the universe requires simultaneous nullification of polarity, orientation, and temporal phase.
Exactly. When you execute all 3 at once, the operation mathematically and ontologically cancels the projection itself. It returns the manifested system back to its absolute invariant source state within the UFT.
The source is recovered.
Cool.
Raise CPT.
Yeah.
You. But the reality of our universe is that things don't always happen perfectly and simultaneously, right?
They absolutely do not.
Which forces us to ask a critical question. What happens when nature only does part of the job? Like, what happens when the universe flips 1 or 2 of those axes, but fails to execute the total restoration? We should expect to see glitches in the matrix, shouldn't we?
We do see them. And they are some of the most studied and perplexing phenomena in all of quantum physics.
Really?
Yes. The sources classify these events under the paradox of asymmetry, focusing heavily on CP violation and neutrino chirality.
Okay.
These are instances where the concept of partial projections becomes physically observable.
Let's tackle CP violation first, because, it is a proven reality in standard physics, right?
It is, yeah.
When physicists study the weak nuclear force, which is responsible for radioactive decay, they observe that if you only apply charge conjugation and parity inversion to certain particles, the laws of physics do not remain perfectly symmetrical.
Right, the system decays at slightly different rates.
Yeah.
The mathematical symmetry actually breaks.
And standard physics acknowledges that CP violation is real. They measure the discrepancy, and basically they just kind of shrug, accepting it as a quirk of the weak interaction.
A glitch they can't fully explain.
But Lilien's UFT doesn't shrug. It actually explains the mechanics of the break.
It explains it through the math of partial projection. The equation shows that CP does not equal total coherence restoration.
Because something is missing.
Right. When you perform CP on a weak interaction, you have corrected the polarity bias and you have corrected the orientational bias. But you have omitted the multivector temporal phase component. You left out the T.
And because the T inversion is missing, the total bias isn't canceled. The system reveals a stark asymmetry to the observer.
Exactly. And here's the philosophical linchpin of Lilien's argument, that asymmetry only exists in the partial projection.
Wait, say that again?
The asymmetry only exists in the partial projection. The underlying universal field tensor has not broken. The source architecture is still perfectly coherent and mathematically balanced.
Okay.
But because the phenomenological inversion is incomplete, The reduced physical projection, a shadow on the wall, fails to balance. We perceive an asymmetry not because reality is fundamentally broken, but because our access to reality's restoration mechanism is partial.
Oh, man. Returning to our shadow analogy, this clicks perfectly. We have a pristine, mathematically perfect 3D globe casting a flat 2D shadow on the wall, right?
Okay.
The globe is the UFT. The shadow is our physical universe. If you only rotate that flat shadow in 2 dimensions, say, flipping it up and down, which is your C, and left and right, which is your P, that shadow is going to warp.
It will.
Its proportions will distort based on the angle of the light. It will look entirely broken and asymmetrical. But the asymmetry belongs to the shadow, not the source.
Exactly.
You absolutely need that third dimension of rotation, the depth axis, which represents T, to reveal the perfect, unbroken symmetry of the sphere.
The asymmetry we observe in CP violation is precisely what the sources term a signature of manifestation. It is not an error in the code of the universe. It is the mandatory price the universe pays for phenomenological stabilization.
Signature of manifestation. That concept becomes even more literal when we look at the second major physical glitch detailed in the sources, which is neutrino chirality.
Oh, yes.
The paper introduces a concept called the hidden hemisphere model, and it honestly feels like discovering a secret room in a house you've lived in your entire life.
It really does. So neutrinos are these ghostly, nearly massless particles that rarely interact with regular matter.
Right. Trillions of them are passing through your body as we speak.
Yeah. And in the standard model of particle physics, one of their most baffling characteristics is their chirality, or handedness, which relates to how their quantum spin aligns with their momentum.
Okay.
In ordinary weak interactions within our observable universe, we only ever find left-handed neutrinos and right-handed antineutrinos.
Standard physics maps this out and says, well, the weak interaction is just left-handed. That's the rule of the chessboard. Right-handed neutrinos simply do not interact.
Just a blind spot.
But the UFT looks at this glaring asymmetry and states something vastly more profound. It argues that the missing handedness, the right-hand neutrino, is structurally mandated by the Universal Field Tensor. It cannot not exist.
It has to be there.
Right. But it sits completely inaccessible to our physical observation. It is a hidden truth of incomplete dimensional disclosure.
The hidden hemisphere diagram maps this out so elegantly. Imagine a sphere representing the total coherence of the neutrino state. One hemisphere is illuminated by the projection mechanism into our dimensions.
Okay.
This is the ordinary interaction channel. It is the left-handed neutrino we can actually detect with our instruments. But the other hemisphere of the globe remains entirely dark. It is the undisclosed conjugate mode.
It's the dark side of the moon.
Exactly. The universe projects only the accessible truths required to stabilize the particle into our specific dimensional reality. The rest of the tensor structure remains perfectly intact, completely balanced, but physically suppressed from our view. The asymmetry is a filter, not an absence.
The asymmetry is a filter. Man, that phrasing is the perfect bridge to the most mind-bending implication of this entire theory. Because this concept of a stabilization bias, the idea that the universe must hide half of reality just to project the other half into existence, it doesn't just apply to exotic, ghostly particles like neutrinos.
No, it doesn't.
It applies to you listening right now. It applies to the headphones you are wearing, the blood pumping through your veins, and the chair you are sitting in. It is the single grandest asymmetry in the cosmos.
We are addressing the fundamental bias of existence itself, matter-antimatter asymmetry.
Yes, the filter of manifestation. Standard cosmology has been wrestling with this existential crisis for decades.
For a very long time.
According to our best models of the Big Bang, the universe should have created equal, perfectly symmetrical parts of matter and antimatter in its initial expansion.
It should have been a 50-50 split.
Right, but matter and antimatter instantly annihilate upon contact, turning into pure radiation. If the universe was perfectly symmetrical, we shouldn't be here. Everything should have annihilated in the first millisecond.
So it's the flash of light.
Exactly. Yet we look around, and the observable universe is 99.99% matter. Antimatter is incredibly rare. The chessboard is incredibly biased. Matter won the cosmic coin toss.
And standard physics often treats this as a miraculous, mathematically frustrating accident. A slight, inexplicable imbalance in the early universe that allowed just enough matter to survive.
Just a lucky break.
Right. But the UFT perspective frames matter dominance not as an accident, but as a mandatory coherence reduction bias.
Walk us through the mechanics of that coherence reduction bias. How does the Universal Field Tensor dictate that matter must dominate?
Recall the principle we established earlier. Manifestation requires reduction. The UFT itself is perfectly balanced, perfectly coherent in its polarity.
Well.
But when that absolute structure drops through the dimensional cascade,
Hmm.
when it hits the filter of manifestation to project into spacetime, it faces a massive structural crisis.
A crisis.
Yeah, because if the projection remained perfectly balanced, expressing equal parts matter and antimatter into the physical 3.0D arena, the physical system would be utterly unstable.
It would violently annihilate over and over.
Exactly. It could never form a stable proton, let alone a star, a planet, or biological life.
So to survive the projection process, the universe is forced to make a choice. It has to pick a side.
Precisely. To stabilize into durable, lasting physical forms, the projection mechanism must preferentially favor one coherence polarity over the other. The resulting matter dominance of our observable universe is an asymmetry of manifestation.
Are spacetime stabilized into a matter bias?
Yes, the antimatter conjugate mode was not destroyed, and the source did not lose its perfect balance. The antimatter conjugate is simply physically suppressed.
It's just hidden.
Right. It remains deeply embedded within the underlying structure of the UFT as a required relational tension. The source is balanced, the shadow just locked onto one polarity so that existence could endure.
Matter dominance is an asymmetry of manifestation, not a loss of source coherence. When you really sit with that, it reorients your entire relationship with physical reality.
It really does.
Every physical object you interact with today is essentially the universe actively choosing a bias, holding on to a severe dimensional distortion, specifically so that reality doesn't annihilate itself. You exist purely because the universe is willing to maintain an asymmetrical illusion.
And if we understand that our physical isolation and localized reality are illusions generated by this dimensional projection, it provides a breathtaking resolution to another massive problem in physics.
Which is?
Quantum entanglement.
Mhm.
The sources draw a very deliberate, direct line connecting CPT invariance to entanglement.
Let's trace that line. Because the paper states that if CPT is the proof that coherence is definitively preserved across total inversion, then quantum entanglement is the proof that coherence is definitively preserved across projected separation.
Let's look at the mechanics of entanglement for a second.
Okay.
You take two quantum particles, you entangle their states, and you separate them physically. You can put one particle on Earth and send the other particle to a galaxy billions of light years away.
Okay, opposite ends of the universe.
Right. And according to standard locality, no signal can travel faster than the speed of light. Yet when you measure the spin of the particle on Earth, you instantly, in zero time, determine the exact state of the particle across the universe.
Einstein famously derided this as spooky action at a distance because it completely violates the geometric container. It breaks the rules of the chessboard.
But the UFT resolves the spookiness entirely. Because if we follow the logic of the hyperfractal dimensional cascade, distance itself is part of the shadow.
Wait, distance itself is an illusion.
Yes. If two entangled particles are physically separated by light years but act as a single unified system, it fundamentally implies that the empty space between them is just another orientational scar of the projection.
That is the mechanical reality of the UFT. Physical separation, spatial fragmentation, and distance are strictly localized features of the 3.0D projection. They only exist on the 2D paper of the shadow.
Exactly.
But the deeper relational architecture of the source tensor is never actually severed. The two entangled particles are not communicating across billions of light years of space. At the level of the Universal Field Tensor, they are literally the exact same coherent structural node.
They never separated.
They are 2 pixels on our screen, looking like they are far apart, but they are being generated by the exact same single line of source code.
That's a great way to put it.
Entanglement and CPT are screaming the same fundamental truth to us. Locality is a fragmented projection. The physical universe appears divided, expansive, and separated, but the underlying coherence of reality is absolute and unbroken.
We have spent this entire deep dive essentially tearing down the walls of the physical universe and rebuilding it as a highly distorted, mathematically biased projection of an unseeable tensor.
We really have.
The natural question for any physicist, or really anyone listening, is where does this leave traditional physics? Do we discard the standard model? Do we throw out a century of relativistic quantum mechanics?
And Lilien's work is incredibly careful not to do that. The framework culminates in a progression the sources call the coherence claim ladder.
The claim letter.
Yeah, it explicitly maps out how this radical new theory coexists with and even honors the standard physics that got us here. The ladder charts the philosophical journey we just took.
Right, step by step.
We started with the ontological gap, acknowledging that standard CPT is true but incomplete. We moved to recognizing spacetime as a projection. We redefined the internal inversions of C, P, and T. We confronted the paradox of asymmetry and partial inversions, and we established that total restoration requires all three axes.
But the apex of that ladder is what Lilien terms the geometric limit. And this is crucial. The paper does not claim that standard relativistic quantum field theory is mathematically incorrect.
No.
It claims that standard physics is the absolute, mathematically perfect limit of the shadow.
Standard physics is preserved as the exact geometric limit of a deeper law. I find that incredibly elegant.
It really is.
It doesn't insult the work of Einstein or the architects of quantum mechanics. It doesn't tear down the house they built. It simply excavates the ground beneath it and builds a vastly deeper basement. Standard physics has successfully and flawlessly mapped the geometric shadow. It has decoded the space-time readable expression of reality.
It is a profound level of scientific integration.
Yeah.
The standard model provides the math of the shadow. The unified coherence theory provides the math of the object casting the shadow.
And the source paper lays out very clear, actionable, future research directions to begin proving this connection empirically.
The roadmap for the next generation of physics is right here.
It is. The paper proposes formally mapping the Universal Field Tensor to existing quantum field operators. It challenges physicists to mathematically align those mysterious multivector T1 through T5 time axes with actual observable quantum temporal operators.
And most intriguingly, they are looking for new domains of leakage.
Leakage?
Yeah. If the UFT is the true structural source, and physical manifestation is merely a biased projection, there should be extreme energetic domains, perhaps near black holes, or in high-energy particle collisions beyond our current technological limits where the biases of the shadow actually fray.
Where the projection breaks down.
Right. There should be areas where the partial projection asymmetries can be empirically measured, providing tangible evidence of the tensor beneath.
So physics for the next 50 years won't just be about finding smaller particles to add to the chessboard. It will be a dedicated hunt for leaks in the space-time projection. We are shifting from mapping the container to actively decoding the source code of reality.
And as we synthesize the breadth of Lilien's framework, it brings a profound sense of unity to the chaos of observation. The text encapsulates it with a statement that serves as the philosophical thesis of our entire discussion.
Let's quote.
Reality may disclose asymmetry, but it cannot lose coherence.
Reality may disclose asymmetry, but it cannot lose coherence. There is something deeply comforting about that mechanical truth.
There really is.
The brokenness, the friction, the heavy biases and asymmetries we observe in the universe and experience in our own lives, they are not catastrophic flaws in the design. They are the strict structural requirements for existence. Without the bias, we would instantly dissolve back into the infinite, unmanifested perfection of the source.
Our existence demands the asymmetry.
And that leaves me with a final lingering thought for you to carry with you long after this deep dive ends. We've explored how the relentless, irreversible forward march of time, the inescapable gravity binding us to space, and the very matter forming our bodies are just stabilization biases, necessary illusions forced upon the universe so that reality could project into a tangible form.
Yeah?
If that is mathematically true for the fundamental laws of physics, what other profound parts of the human experience are just projection signatures of a deeper, unseeable perfection? When you next look into a mirror and feel disoriented by the flaws, the friction, or the fleeting nature of the reflection staring back, consider that the cracks in the glass, the heavy biases of your existence, might be the only reason you are capable of experiencing reality at all.
A truly staggering perspective to walk away with.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the shadow.